Welcome to Chapter 1 of what is probably going to be an incredibly long video series, which will probably take me 5 years. Yeah, probably take me 5 years to catch up. So this is a summary of the story of the Eighth Doctor. The wonderful franchise, what we call Doctor Who, has, as you probably know if you're watching this, a number of different people that portray the eponymous character of the Doctor. And unlike James Bond, where people just sort of get replaced with new actors, it is built into the story in universe that the Doctor changes face, changes body, and this allows the show to continue as a franchise in perpetuity, basically. But it also enables the storytelling to change around because the Doctor is essentially the same person each time, but certain aspects of the personality shift, and so you get a different take on the same person according to each actor, which is pretty fun. So the Eighth Doctor is perhaps the least known in popular knowledge because he has appeared on screen twice. Once in 1996 in a TV movie, which did not succeed in starting off a new TV series, and then once in 2013 for the 50th anniversary of the show. He was brought back for his regeneration scene. So we get on screen, we see the very beginning and the very end of his life. So in that sense, he is the most underrated, the most underdone Doctor. However, because the show did not come back on air after 1996 until later and with a new Doctor, the non-television stories just kept going for him. So he ended up with what is still the longest novel range for any Doctor. He had 73 books in one primary novel range and a couple other novels that can be added to that. And also, when Big Finish Audio Productions got into doing Doctor Who stories, they pretty quickly got Paul McGann on board to reprise the Eighth Doctor, and so he's done a ton of stories there as well. So the big question is, how do we put all this together and tell the story of who this Eighth Doctor is? So I'm going to be doing this chapter by chapter, so to speak, a few stories at a time in what I understand to be the best harmonization of the novels and the audio stories, and obviously the two TV appearances. So we're going to start starting with chapter 1, his first year, which is a bit of an odd description perhaps. So this is defined by one of the novels. The first novel is called The Eight Doctors. It takes place immediately after the TV movie. But then the second novel, called Vampire Science, begins by establishing that a year has passed in the Doctor's life. He and his new companion, Samantha Jones, have had some travels, but he left her at a Greenpeace rally so she could have fun at that. And he went off to do his own thing, got distracted, and spent an entire year of his life without her before coming back rather sheepishly to pick her up again and continue their adventures. So that was... it's a bit weird in some ways, but it was actually done so that it could be reconciled with some comics that were being made at the same time. And actually a later book confirms that that's exactly what he was up to. So the first year of the Doctor's life is a bit of a mishmash of different things that he was up to and a collection of different companions that he traveled with. So anyway, let's start at the beginning. The Eighth Doctor. He is introduced in the TV movie, which does not have a name, which was novelized in a book that doesn't have a name. Sometimes we call it the novel of the film. Original, right? So there we're introduced to the Eighth Doctor. Long hair-ish, very passionate, very excited. He's the first really romantic Doctor, not in that he's out for romance as such, but everyone's just attracted to him. The Doctor is usually a charismatic figure, but the Eighth Doctor brings in, for for the first time, really, a romantic interest that the woman just wants to be with him. And even men are just charmed by this personality that he has. And what we see in the early part of the Eighth Doctor's life is that he's a very charming person. He's a very charming person. People like him, and just there's a natural inclination to like him and to listen to him. So this is something that gets played with later on to experiment and see where the story can go. So he's a very romantic, very passionate person. He's also established as one of the stronger idealists. The Doctor is always generally anti-violence, but exactly how far he goes with that varies from one incarnation to another. The Eighth Doctor seems to set himself on a fresh footing with being particularly more pacifistic than a couple of his predecessors. So he also has, in the TV movie, this weird tendency to recognize a complete stranger and say, "Oh, this is your name. Don't answer this question on your exam next month, but this one." And or it's like, "Oh, yeah, don't be in this city next year." So he has these flashes of future knowledge, which might have been a point against the TV movie. People might have thought that was kind of weird, but a little bit of that is actually sort of adopted and say, all right, well, this is a talent that the Eighth Doctor has. And so we see a bit of that in his early stories as well. So that's a bit of his character, and he does get some character development as time goes on. But this is just his first year, chapter 1 here. So the main stories here is the TV movie, where he is bringing the supposedly dead remains of the Master back to Gallifrey to be buried after the Daleks executed him. It's a sort of a convoluted setup, and the Master is not completely dead, takes over the TARDIS. The Doctor has to land. He's shot by a gang, and he regenerates, and that whole story goes off, and it's kind of fun. And it's not the best story as such, but it's so endearing. Some of us just can't help but love it. But unfortunately, it sets off a whole collection of new issues that the franchise had to deal with. The main one is the idea that is the Doctor claiming that he's half human, and the Master also making the realization, the Doctor is half human. So that is a big upset to pre-established Doctor Who canon, and a good chunk of the novel range is subtly dedicated to ironing that out. The immediate issue, though, how the Master was able to become this sort of weird snake-like thing that takes over people's bodies even though he's dead, but not quite dead. So that's explored in the very first Doctor Who novel for the Eighth Doctor. It's called The Eight Doctors. Basically, immediately after the TV movie, he's sitting down in his TARDIS having another cup of tea, and he falls into a Master's last trap where he loses his memory, and the TARDIS has to take him to each of his previous incarnations to regain his memory bit by bit. And each time he encounters a previous incarnation, he somehow impacts a part of their story, which is kind of fun because you're getting a new angle on an old classic story. Like he encounters the first Doctor right before he was going to just brain a caveman on the head with a rock, and it changes his mind. He encounters the second Doctor when he's trying to decide if he should call in the Time Lords to help with the war games. And so each Doctor, it's kind of fun, but it's also really kind of contrived. So it's again one of those iffy books. But what it does is begin the work of trying to answer the question of why the Master had this weird power, and how the Doctor is or is not half human, and introduces his main companion for the first section of the novels, Sam Jones. Samantha Jones, but her friends call her Sam. You know, a teenage girl with a boyish nickname and a sense of adventure. We're going to see this a couple times, especially with the Eighth Doctor. It's just something people seemed to do for him. So she's introduced, and the novels will continue with her. But in his first year, he doesn't spend a lot of time with her because he accidentally, runs off and does his own thing. So we're introduced to Sam in the Eight Doctors, and then we have a short story from the Earth and Beyond short stories, one called Bounty. It takes place in an island nation just southwest of India. I always pronounce the Seychelles because I don't speak French, but in the audiobook they pronounce it the Seychelles. So there you go. That's where the Doctor and Sam are, on a nice little island, and they have Sam's first encounter with an alien. Up to that point, the Doctor was not planning on taking Sam off-world, but they're getting to know each other through this story, and she eventually convinces him to take her to see the world, see the universe, not just the world. So that's a fun short story. It sort of goes back and fills in the gap of something that we missed with Sam getting to know the Doctor and getting to know the TARDIS and what it's like to travel in space and time. The rest of his first year is spent traveling with Stacy, another human, and Sard, a Martian, an ice warrior. Interesting couple. I think they get married in the end or something. I don't know. I haven't actually read any of the comics myself, but the books establish that he was definitely traveling with them during that gap period, that first year. There are other comics with another character named Izzy, and I don't know the deal. Some people think that's not canonical. Perhaps that I assume that fits into this first year as well. But anyway, that's the Doctor's first year. The TV movie, the introduction of Sam Jones, these excursions with the comic book characters, and then coming back. And we'll come back to the novel range in Chapter 2 of the Eighth Doctor's story.